Welcome back to GAA Fan TV. My name is Aaron. Delighted to be joined by Limerick-based journalist John Keogh to run through this weekend's action in the All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship. Three big games to discuss, and obviously Clare taking on Limerick, a huge game in the Munster Senior Hurling Championship. Galway going up against Kilkenny in the Leinster Senior Hurling Championship, and also the Joe McDonagh Cup final between Kerry and Antrim as well. Just a reminder, we're brought to you by Declan Kirby GAA Star, the best children's GAA book out there in the market at the minute. You can find it on Amazon, Easons, all good bookshops, and it's available in the description down below. So make sure to check that out when you get the chance. John, first of all, how's things? I mean, I'd imagine the excitement is building towards this weekend's Munster final. Obviously, tickets selling out in 11 minutes, which must be a record really for a Munster final.
Yeah, the appetite is crazy down here at the moment, Darren. Certainly from a Limerick point of view, I know it's the same all around Clare as well. It isn't even building this week. It's been building since they met in the round robin, that epic encounter in Ennis as well. Look, it's great. Weather's supposed to be good on Thurles Sunday. It's what we've all grown up with. You know, sunny days for provincial finals is what we all want. But yeah, the appetite is crazy here. That 11-minute sellout for the 10,000 tickets that went on sale. Look, I'm involved in my own GAA club at home, and it's been crazy tickets-wise, akin to an All-Ireland, and it's just everyone wants a ticket to this game. And with 45,000, it's going to be a sellout, you know, and the tension is building definitely since Ennis, and but by Sunday, it's going to be fever pitch for sure.
Yeah, and you get the feeling really that this, I suppose, as a spectacle, really could probably be the biggest GAA game of the year so far anyways, you'd have to say so, like across all codes. I mean, when you look at, I suppose, how well Clare have played this year, like they've obviously really upped their game. Limerick have obviously, you know, set the standard the last couple of years, and obviously, you know, bidding for 4 in a row will be the first time any county's won 4 in a row in the Munster Championship since Cork in the 1980s, and Clare obviously haven't won this themselves since 97. So you know, huge, and obviously two big rivals. I think the first time you're playing each other in a Munster final since 95. So it really does feel like the stage is really set for, I suppose, two big historic counties and huge traditional rivals meeting in Munster's biggest game of the year.
Yeah, I can't describe how massive a game this is. You know, everyone has their, in hurling and football, camogie, ladies football, we all have our local rivalries with the county next to you. There's just something different about Limerick-Clare. I mean, maybe it's Limerick's success in the last few years. Clare had it in 2013, and Limerick will be very disappointed in the 90s not to have won a couple of All-Irelands, where Clare, in the opposite years, Limerick lost 2 finals in 94, 96, Clare won in 95, 97. You know, a lot of Clare people living in Limerick, a lot of working and living in Limerick, Limerick people living and working in Clare. You know, that it just seems that bit. You know, I mentioned fever pitch a while ago, but you mentioned tradition as well. It really, really is. You spoke about 95, and it was Clare's breakthrough year, really, under Gerlach Nan. Like, I even remember it, like that Davy Fitz free, you know, like that resulted in a goal that led Clare, you know, on that path. You've even bigger subplots, like for me as well. Paul Kinnerk is a very obvious one with Davy in 2013 as well, helping them win that All-Ireland. You know, you've James Moore, a former Limerick hurler and brother of Niall, and Ollie Moore, you know, involved in Brian Lohan's backroom team. Brian Lohan was UL manager in the Fitzgibbon Cup for a few years, knows a lot of these Limerick lads. You know, there's so many subplots, even before you even touch the field, you know, in the lead up. And obviously you have the game that happened only a few weeks ago, earlier this month, or last month now, in early May. And, you know, there was plenty going on off the ball, there was plenty going on the ball, and some outstanding hurling as well. And I expect more of the same on Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned there, like, I mean, obviously some of the big games between these two down the years, and you obviously mentioned, you know, 95, that big Davy Fitz moment, and 2013, obviously when Clare got the breakthrough in 2013. I mean, is that a little nervous though as well for yourself? Like, every time Clare seem to have had big moments in the All-Ireland Senior Championship down the year, it tends to involve yourselves at some point. Like, they do seem to have to beat yourselves. I mean, is that maybe a worry as well at some stage, that like in some aspect it could be written for Clare once again?
John Kiley will be the first to admit his record against Clare since he's been in charge. You know, he's lost to them twice in championship. It's only themselves in Cork, I think, that have beaten Limerick twice during his tenure. So I think it was his first year Clare beat them in Thurles, and then there was that massacre in 2018 when Limerick finished third and Clare just beat Limerick up really in Ennis. Limerick have also had a good recent record against Clare. They beat them in 2020. That doubled up as the league final during COVID, obviously, and everything. And they didn't have to beat them last year, and that rankers with Clare people as well. I think Limerick won in All-Ireland without beating us. Now, Limerick did beat everyone else, Sparkle Kenny and that, but look, it just goes back to, again, rivalry. Clare, these players know each other so well. Again, I'll go back to Fitzgibbon Cup. So many of these players played together and against each other with LAT, and now TUS Midwest, TUS Midwest. And so they know each other in and out, and you see that when they come up, there just seems to be an added intensity. Whether that augurs back to history, Limerick certainly won't think so. I remember John Kiley very clearly in 18 talking about these players make their own history, and that's what we're out to do. And Limerick aren't burdened by anything like that. And I don't think this group of players gets burdened by anything. You could say a poor enough league campaign by their standards. They may have been 6 weeks behind everyone else when it comes to what teams were doing physically and hurling wise, but Limerick were still very disappointed with how that league ended up. Still, he may have got what he wanted out of the league, but they still would have been like to have been the other side of the table rather than back down the end. But look, Clare's people certainly may think they have a hoodoo over Limerick, but I don't think it's going to concern Limerick going into this game.
Yeah, Farney Fan TV was just saying here about the back door. I think if you're referring about the football preview, that'll be out tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. But I suppose getting back to this game in terms of obviously both sides, I mean, what have you made of Limerick in general this year, I suppose, as a big Limerick fan? I mean, obviously, as you said there, like during the league campaign, probably didn't go as according to plan, but I suppose at the same time, that was similar last year as well. Like you took a while to get going in the league and it didn't affect you at all. And obviously, as soon as the championship has come around, you seen yourselves obviously against Cork deliver a big win there. You got over Waterford and Tipperary as well. So what have you made of Limerick's performances in general? And I suppose there's nothing to suggest anyway at this moment in time that the Limerick steam train is going to slow down anytime soon.
No, my own view is that they haven't hit anywhere near where they can hit as of yet. At times against Cork, and fits and starts against Cork, fits and starts against Waterford. The last 10 minutes against Tip, and Clare kind of didn't really let them play. And I suppose they're not supposed to let them play, but they won't be happy. They've got through games, and it's a sign of a good or great team, or whatever way you want to call this Limerick team, that they've got through games. That there was a massive atmosphere down in Páirc Uí Chaoimh for that game, and Cork fans were convinced this is it now, we'll get you for the All-Ireland final. Okay, there was the league game in the TUS Gaelic grounds earlier on in this year, and Limerick got through that, and they really wanted pulling up, really dented Cork, and Cork obviously have come back from that, and fair play to them for doing so. But yeah, like the Cork game, Limerick would have been happy coming out of it and still would have looked up to step it up. Waterford and Limerick was a titanic tussle. It looked like it was going to be the first of a few meetings between these two teams. It hasn't worked out that way for Waterford. Tipperary game, Limerick never got going. It was a poor performance where they couldn't be happy with how that went. And then the Clare game, there's lots of subplots that happened in that game. And the end, Limerick still managed to get a draw. So a bit hit and miss in the championship overall, Aaron. I think they'll be, I think I could be wrong on this as well, of course, but they have their sights, firmly set on where they want to be at a certain time of the year. And John Kiley said this in the past as well. Limerick start out at All-Ireland final. Okay, it's July, it was August last year, and traditionally September. And they work backwards from there. That's where they aim to be, and they go from there after that. Now, I suppose every team should be really thinking that way as well, but that's very much Limerick's plan. The last 2 years, Limerick last year had to win 4 games to win All-Ireland. Declan Hannon said in the lead up to this game, we had to win 4 games to get to a Munster final. So there's been a bit of management in that. They've had injuries as well during this championship, and they've still got through topping the group with ease, really, to be honest about it. So where are Limerick now? We'll know Sunday. I certainly think there's a lot more to give in this team. You've liked some Mike Casey back. I know we'll get really into the nitty-gritty of things in a while, but he's been a huge addition. It's put Dan Morrissey back out in the wing. Mike Casey slotted in seamlessly back into that Limerick team. I don't think anyone expected how quickly he'd come on, but it's a mark of the man to see that. But where Limerick are, we'll find out Sunday, I suppose. And even if, but no one's contemplating this. But even if Limerick do lose, you still wouldn't bet against them ending up in an All-Ireland final.
Yeah, I mean, you could see them regrouping and sort of going from there if that was the case. But as you said as well, like, I mean, there does seem to be a lot of similarities with Limerick this season to last season. I mean, both, struggled obviously through the league, probably a little bit slow at the start of the championship, but obviously in that Munster final last year, 10 points down at half time, was all going Tipperary's way, and then all of a sudden you just turned it on, clicked. So it does seem, as you said there, like with Limerick and these players and John Coyley's men, like it does seem to be that around this time of the year, Munster finals and sort of All-Ireland semi-finals, finals, that seems to be really when you start to click into gear and we see the best. Because even when you think back to 2018 and even 2019, although he did get beat by Kilkenny, like he obviously finished second to Tipperary in the round robin, but then beat them in the Munster final. So it does seem to be that you're saving yourselves for that sort of big moment and then big occasions.
Yeah, and that's it. Again, John Coyley, in talking to media this week, was talking about, Declan Hanna mentioned as well, the workload that has had to be managed. With like every game last year, Limerick had 2 weeks, in between games. He spoke about the analysis this week about how Limerick's head analyst Sean O'Donnell had to turn things around very, very quickly from game to game. And again, I mentioned earlier injuries, and you're picking up niggly things that another week would heal, but then you're waiting another week after that, and you have games constantly. It has to take it out. What I will say is Limerick have had a 3-week run-in now to this game, as have Clare as well, of course. And you just get the sense, and again, Limerick, Clare people will disagree. I'm sure they'll say the exact same thing about their own team. But Limerick have had that time to maybe just sort out a few things that they weren't happy with in that round robin, which I'm sure there was plenty. And, they've had that time now to kind of sit back and say, take stock and look, where are we heading next? And we're heading into a Munster final against a Clare team that, you could argue bullied Limerick around the park a little bit in Ennis, on their home ground. Clare like that physical thing. Obviously, Limerick like it as well. But, there were things happened on the ball and off the ball I mentioned, and, both sides. I'm not pinning all this on one team, and there was things. And look, Limerick lay down a physical marker against every team they play and pride themselves on that. And I'm sure I'd be fairly sure there'd be intent on doing something similar on Sunday. But, I'll go back to saying it has all the markings of a classic Munster final. And hopefully, from all our points of view, I'll obviously be hoping for a Limerick win in green, but hopefully it just lives up to the occasion.
Yeah, how do you think Limerick go about stopping Tony Kelly, or do they put too much emphasis on him? Because as we've seen with Clare this year, I mean, even when Tony Kelly's been injured at times, they've still had other players to step up. Like he obviously wasn't around for the Waterford game, and they still managed to come through that quite comfortably. They've obviously got Peter Duggan now, obviously in the side. Ryan Taylor stepped up as well. Cathal Malone, Shane O'Donnell's been in brilliant form. So, I mean, the Limerick place too much emphasis on Tony Kelly, because then, you're obviously freeing up other players potentially there. So, like, how do you think Limerick will go about, I suppose, the talent that is Tony Kelly? Because there's no question that, on his day, he's probably the best hurler in the country, if not in the top 3.
Yeah, I don't think they will. I don't think they'll single out any plan for Tony Kelly. 2 of the best games I've ever seen Tony Kelly play have been against Limerick. That 2020 game I spoke about, he got 14, 15 points. And he got 16 the last day as well. So I think Limerick are very much setting their system defensively with the 6 guys back and staying deep. Dermot Burns and Dan Morrissey on the wings, with Declan Hannon sitting even further. 2 midfielders coming back. I don't see Limerick changing that. Tony Kelly has a free rein in the Clare team. Limerick will back themselves to outscore Tony Kelly and Clare. And I think that's very much the way they look at it. It's a wider question, should they? Is a different kettle of fish. But I think if you take someone like Sean Finn, who's been the outstanding member of a full back line the last 4 or 5 years, do you take him out of cornerback to man mark someone, and kind of you're opening up maybe something inside for Peter Duggan and Shane O'Donnell and Ryan Taylor, as you mentioned, having outstanding seasons today. Have been really huge additions. Certainly having Duggan and O'Donnell back. But I think Limerick they'll go on to 6, 2 midfielders sit deep. And if Tony scores, what I'd say on that is score 5 points from play, which is great for any player to get on any given day. But 11 frees as well on top. And I think that what will annoy Limerick more is that, yeah, they do, like, I don't subscribe to this thing that at times Limerick are harshly refereed with certain decisions. I'll certainly back that up 100%, but some of the stuff is silly with the free arm, and it's going to be blown up every time. They have to cut out fouls, simple fouls. Fouls are fouls. Look, we all watch every game. There's fouls and they're given. Sometimes they're necessary. But it's the silly fouls that are 40, 50 yards out that are easy frees. Like Kelly missed a few frees as well in the second half of that game. You know, and you just, that's what I think Limerick will do anyway, is just they're not going to change for anyone. And again, I'll go back to what John Kiley says after every press conference, after every game, when he's asked about opposition, he said, we just focus on ourselves. And I think that's going to be the case again on Sunday.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well, because obviously the Grode Hegarty red card, I mean, it was awfully harsh. Obviously, like I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But I mean, in general this year, I mean, maybe there has been some slight issues with Limerick, maybe with discipline at times, and maybe that's sort of been, like, if you were to point out weaknesses, it's very hard, obviously, to look at weaknesses in this Limerick side, because they've obviously won, 3 Munsters in a row, the last 2 All-Irelands as well. So when you're looking at, really, you're kind of thinking, like, what is the weaknesses? But could that maybe be a certain issue at some point? Because as you've seen with Hegarty obviously getting that red, like, maybe that's something that's in the referee's mind, sort of going into the game before. So you just don't know sometimes.
No, you don't. Look, the Garrod Hegarty thing has been talked to death at this stage about, does he do this? Is he too physical? I think teams have been looking for a while to target Garrod ever since 2020, where he was hurler of the year, and him and Tom Morrissey gave performances that year that, if you kind of felt sorry for Tom at times, that he'd had such a good season, but Garrod was just that little bit higher level. That red card, I can see how, I've said that everyone's talked about it that around here and elsewhere as well. I'll never see how it's a red card. I mean, the one at the sideline ball, okay, you could argue Garrod shouldn't have tried a quick one. He knew what he was doing. David McInerney knew what he was doing as well. McInerney was on a yellow. The only person who could possibly get a yellow card in that situation was David McInerney. I've never seen, and I don't think I'll ever see since, any player getting a yellow card for that. The second one, I've flip-flopped about, with Aaron Fitzgerald. Look, we've all played games, we've all played sports, and they're involved in games, and you're looking for any edge you can possibly get. So if someone like Garrod Hegarty flicks a hurley back at you, making contact or not, you're going to try and make the most of it, knowing he's on a yellow card. Do what you can for your team. Maybe get pilloried for that, but like, it is what it is. It was very harsh, and I mean, I think I wasn't in Ennis that day, but I was watching telly, and you see the referee going over to the linesman's kind of shaking his head, not knowing. I don't think there's anything in it. Maybe is that what he said? Maybe that's not what he said. The referee goes in to check with his umpires. They have a kind of similar face. I could be wrong. The column 9s ask, was it a strike? The umpire kind of shrugged his shoulders, and the referee still comes out with a second yellow. So, I mean, I can't, like, certainly that game against Clare, I thought there was a lot of poor refereeing decision that went against Limerick. In general, throughout games this year, I don't subscribe to that. I think they've been a little bit clumsy in the tackle at times. But certainly, like, I could point to incidents about Sean Finn clearly being fouled, led to a clear point. David Reedy nearly lost his shorts at one stage as well, and that's the stuff that was obvious, And again, Limerick are masters of the off the ball stuff too. I'm not saying that about Clare. It's just there was a lot of antipathy towards that refereeing performance, and I'm not here to hammer referees. No one wants that. There is no game without referees, and I think the standard has improved this year as well. But going back to Garrod Hegarty, teams are targeting. I think referees are targeting him as well. Garrod will tell you himself, and has gone on the record and saying the challenge against Galway was too high. It's a red card, straight up. But if referees are being prejudiced to certain players going into games, we have a problem. We have a very big problem in GAA if that's the case, because you take every issue on its merit, no matter what the player. I think you could be seeing something similar with Austin Gleeson and Waterford. You don't want the likes of Austin Gleeson and Garrod Hegarty questioning their future in games. Not saying that's happening, but for very little, and I'd go far as Ian Galvin with Clare earlier in the year as well. Nothing incidents that are ending up in red cards. And when you've staunch Claremen like Davy Fitz and Anthony Daly saying, "Where's that red card coming from?" That's enough for me,
Yeah, absolutely. No, like, I'd have to agree with you there as well. Like, there definitely has been some questionable decisions. Like, we've seen that probably more so in hurling in the past year than the previous years, obviously. But at the same time, like, it's obviously very hard for referees, and you do
100%.
feel for them a lot of the time, like, especially
Certainly as well, Aaron, with the hand pass rule. I think hammering down on that this season has caused referees an awful lot of pressure. It's it's landed them through no fault of their own. I mean, it's very hard to decipher if there's a gap between the hand and the ball at this stage. What looks like a throw, what looks like a hand pass, and really or hitting down on that incident, that skill alone, or lack of skill in some senses, I think has made the referee's life, which is very difficult, as you said in the first place. It's made it even harder this year. And cut them a break. I mean, you want to see the ball move. You don't want to see 50-50 calls going against any team for an iffy hand pass. Leave the game go. I know the rule is there, has to be a clear strike with the hand. But I mean, some of the ones that have been called up all over hurling, all over, and underage games, you're seeing it as well now, and it's kind of needs to be held back a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, and I suppose, like, in terms of Limerick in general, obviously Kyle Hayes, like, we've seen him obviously, play sort of in the halfback line last year. He's sort of been moved further up the pitch this year. Like, what type of role do you think he'll play in this game? Because it has been interesting with Kyle Hayes, like, in terms of where he's operating. So how do you think, Limerick will go about deploying him in this game? Because obviously with no Cian Lynch, and obviously with his injury, that'd be a big miss. And I suppose getting the best out of Kyle Hayes will be crucial, really, to Limerick's chances in this game.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, no team can replace Cian, like Cian Lynch. He's a one of a kind. He can do things I've never seen any hurler do before, and I think we all marvel at what he brings to the table every time he goes out in the field. But people will be quick to remember that Kyle Hayes was man of the match as a Garsoon in 18, still an under 21 hurler, and had another year the following year, 21s, man of the match in an All-Ireland final against Galway, where he gave an exhibition at centre forward against a fantastic player in Gerard McInerney. I'm sure we'll be talking about in a while. Just gave a sterling performance there. Limerick pulled one against Tipperary, caught them by surprise by moving them back to the half-back line in 2020, and he's been there since. Like John Cody said after the Cork game, that it's something they've been working on training for a number of months. Not that we saw it, and I know for a fact it wasn't done in challenge games behind closed doors either. So I think that there was a bit of paranoia going on that Limerick were being watched, that they weren't trying that. Look, Kyle's a very versatile hurler. To answer the question, I think he'll be around the half-forward line. I think you could have a half-forward line of Tom Morrissey, Gerard Hegarty, and Kyle at centre on Sunday. Limerick also have the option of leaving him inside, which they did against Clare, and he got that goal against Clare very early on. So Kyle's going to be a handful no matter where he is. They have that option if Colin O'Neill could be back to fitness as well after his ankle issue the last day as well. That saw him miss the Clare game. And Cahill is, for a guy, he was on the panel and on the bench more often than not last season throughout the All-Ireland campaign. But every time he's been introduced this year, he's really shown that there's a talent there that we've seen at an underage level that can maybe hit the heights that we all expect him to do at some stage at senior level. So they could throw Cahill in centre forward like they did when Cian came off injured against Waterford. And Cahill had a fantastic game when he came on that day as well. Limerick didn't really miss Cian against Waterford, which shows you how well Cahill did in that position. It's more a natural position for Cahill than, we'll say, inside the full forward line. You also have Graham Mulcahy as well. So Limerick could end up with a full forward line. Kyle Hayes, Seamus Flanagan, and Aaron Gillan. And if that's the case, I'd be worried for that Clare full back line, because that trio on their day could dismantle any team. But I do think you could see Cathal O'Neill maybe start in the corner, make his way out, and leave Flanagan and Gillan inside. It's all guesswork from our point of view. But I do think Kyle will end up at centre forward.
Yeah, and I don't think Gillan started in the last game versus Clare as well. So I mean, and that's the thing about Limerick. Like, for a lot of the injuries that they've had and problems that they have, it probably hasn't been spoken about enough, because you've still come through the Munster Championship or come through the round robin fairly comfortably in the end. But I suppose ultimately, obviously, you're going to back Limerick to get the victory. But how do you think the game is going to go? How do you think it's going to pan out? And I suppose how much are Limerick going to win by?
I'm not going to say that anyway, for sure, Aaron. I'm not going to pin my head on that. Yeah, I do think Limerick, if their trajectory of the last two seasons is similar, as in they're peaking for the next 3 games, which I think is their belief. Again, I'm open to correction on that. I'm going to back Limerick 100%, because if Limerick play well, I don't think there's a team in the country can touch them. And that's not being disparaging to other counties. It's just how good Limerick are right now. Where do I think the game we won and lost? It could very much be that full forward line battle. And Rory Hayes, Paul Flanagan, Conor Cleary were outstanding in that game against Limerick the last day, but you hit the nail on the head. Aaron Gillan wasn't there. And Aaron Gillan has gone up another notch this year. People say he was lucky the card against Tipperary could have been red. I don't agree with that. It was yellow. Them 2 goals against Tipperary really, certainly the second one, just really finished Tip's challenge that day. And he's just so capable. He can come out in front. He can come out in front. He can get you in behind. He's got every skill and trick in the book as well. He's no angel either, Aaron. Which you need to be at this level, because you're getting plenty of it. You're going to give some of it back, and he gives more than enough back at times. But he's, he could be the key. Limerick. I'd be very interested in Garrod Hegarty's performance from a Limerick point of view on Sunday, because talking to a lot of people this week about the game, Garrod's a very quiet guy off the field. You never hear anything about Garrod doing this, that, or the other. Not that you do with most inter-county players anyway. But he's very serious about his hurling, and I've no doubt he would have been very frustrated and very hurt about that last day against Clare. And, there's no better day to turn up and show, look, this is who I am and this is what I am. And I think Garrod's performance could be key. But on the other side, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier, Aaron. Clare have plenty of other options without Tony Kelly. Ryan Taylor's a serious lad. They've Peter Duggan. That battle with Mike Casey the last day, Mike Casey down 5 or 6 inches maybe to Peter Duggan and held him scoreless and rendered him fairly quiet the whole game. So that's another battle I'd like to see. Sean Finn maybe hasn't hit the heights for Limerick yet that he has done in previous seasons. So I'd be interested to see who he matches up on. If it's Shane O'Donnell, if Shane kind of has been going between the wing forward line and full forward line throughout this championship so far. But Clare showed against Waterford, making 6-7 changes, I think it was, that day, that they really have a bit of strength and depth now, that they've guys to come on. And, you're looking at, I remember I was with very early on in the year in the Munster Hurling Cup, the pre-season competition. I was with Sparrow Loughlin doing commentary on the game for Munster GAA. And Sparrow Loughlin, a Clare legend, he was so disheartened about where Clare were. And I know it was January, but you just couldn't see it. And they've flourished. And you've all credit to Brian Lone and his backroom team. They've really, from positives last year and the year before, just building to really flying this year. They've been absolutely outstanding. No one saw, I think everyone saw Limerick, Cork and Waterford being the 3 teams to come through in whatever order that could be. Clare weren't even mentioned. Let's be honest about it. They weren't. They should have been. People thought there might be a kick in Tipperary under Cullen Bonner. It didn't happen for them, but massive credit has to go out to Clare for what they've done so far in this season. And again, like I said about Limerick, even if the result doesn't go their way on Sunday, there's no doubt they'll be back again as well. The interesting one of me, we mentioned who could be ending up centre forward for Limerick. Well, John Conlon gave an exhibition against Limerick the last day. Now Limerick, just couldn't curtail him at times. He was outstanding. So that could be key. And conversely, on the other side, Declan Hannon goes through games like a Rolls Royce, covers everything. You never see him in the wrong position. He's always 1 or 2 balls a game, comes out heroically, a huge momentum building type of thing, So look, there's so many matchups all over the field. I think like Limerick's midfield, Darragh O'Donovan's back to full fitness. William O'Donoghue has slowly improved with each game. And I thought he was brilliant against Clare. And you mentioned Cathal Malone earlier as well, a player who's come on so much in the last couple of seasons, and so good under high ball. And he's improved in his scoring ability as well. There's just so many matchups. But I will, the way I see it is, if Limerick play well, it's not just Clare, it's other teams. I think they'll beat most teams that come across, if not all. And I think that'll be the case on Sunday.
Yeah, as a neutral, and obviously haven't seen Limerick win the last 3 Munster titles, and with the fact that Clare haven't won one since '97, I'd love to see them get over the line and get that victory. I know you obviously don't want to see that, but I think it would be great for Clare. But at the same time, though, the part of me though that thinks that every time Limerick have faced obstacles since 2019, you've always found a way to overcome them. You think of those battles at Waterford, you overcame that when you were 10 points down against Tipperary. Limerick overcame that as well. Cork, how are you going to deal with such an attacking team and Shane Kingston and everything else, and you just blew them out of the water as well. So it does seem like that's the thing, is for as good as Clare are, and even if Clare go 5, 6, 7 points up in this game, there's always that sort of trump card that Limerick have in John Coyley and Paul Kinnerk, that they can turn things around, because tactically you know, they're probably the best duo probably in Gaelic games at the moment.
Yeah. Look, I think Limerick learned so much from that defeat to Kilkenny in 19. You know, there was all that controversy about the game. It should have been a 65, but John Kiley poo-pooed that straight away. There was no talk. Said, look, we should have won the game. If you're going to win the game, you should have won the game. We shouldn't have been relying on an incident at the last minute. I think, look, it's always said in every sport since the dawn of time, you learn more from your losses than you do your wins. I think Limerick learned an awful lot from that, and they've shown ever since how to navigate, and they've been able to navigate. Just an interesting point on that Tipperary Munster final last year. It was sweltering heat. It was 30-degree heat, and off the pitch, on the pitch in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, I'd say it was a lot hotter. And Tip maybe, you know, didn't perform the second half. They weren't allowed to perform the second half. But in that first half, it was Cian Lynch was kind of getting Limerick out of holes. He was the man for Nicky Quaid was forced to go along, and it was Cian he was aiming for. Limerick don't have that option on Sunday, and you know, like naturally you go to your best player when the chips are down. So that could be an interesting way of it as well. But you've hit the nail on the head, I think, as well, that every time there's been an obstacle in this Limerick team's way since 2018, outside of that game against Kilkenny, and ever since that game, you know, they haven't lost the championship game since then. You know, and that there's a lot to be said for the changes that Paul Kinnerk and John Kiley make, be it only in tempo, in trying to get the tempo up, and that's what was said in at halftime in that game last year against Tipperary. You know, just get tighter on your men, number one. I'm sure there was other things said, but that was what was said after the game, or released to us after the game, that just tempo needed to be better. They got the early goal, and sure we all know what happened from there. But you know, it just seems to be that they always seem to have an answer, and not every team has that answer. We're going to talk about the Leinster final as well, and you're looking at two teams, Kilkenny and Galway, that, you know, there's questions still about. Is there questions still about this Limerick team? I don't think so. The questions are probably towards Clare, and that's not me being a Limerick man piling pressure back on Clare. But we know Limerick can perform in a Munster final. This Limerick team, certainly. This Clare team, we haven't seen them in a Munster final, you know, since 90, or win one since 97. You know, 95 is the last time they beat Limerick in a final of this kind of standard. Obviously the 90s, 95 there was no backdoor, so it was be all and end all. But the questions are on Clare. You know, they are a young coming team under Brian Lohan. He's got another 3 years, and correctly so, given the job he did in his first two. But I think you know, we'll see what both sides, not what both sides are made of. That's probably simplifying it. But we'll see where Clare are and Limerick are on Sunday. I think if Clare win, it gives them huge momentum going into an All-Ireland semi-final. Limerick won't be too pushed. Maybe the longer road it suited them in 18, and it gave them momentum the whole way through. The opposite side, if Clare do lose, could it be that little dig at them, you know, that just upsets the rhythm of their All-Ireland charge? And there's no question, Clare think they can win an All-Ireland, you know, and that this is the shortest route to an All-Ireland is through the winning your provincial championship. So, look, I said it already, and it's just set up on every level to be a cracking contest. And I just hope it lives up to the hype with just a Limerick win.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be a very, very exciting game indeed. And I think for the fans that are going, like, very, very lucky, because I think they're going to be in for one hell of an atmosphere. Like, we've seen the atmosphere Limerick fans have generated down the years, same with Clare as well. So I think it's going to be a very, very exciting game indeed. You mentioned obviously the Leinster final there, Galway against Kilkenny on Saturday evening at Croke Park. You know, an interesting one, this one as well. I mean, you have Henry, or you have Shefflin versus Cody, part two, after the handshake. I mean, like, personally, I don't really think there was too much in the handshake. I kind of just think the media kind of blew it over a little bit just to try and make a bit of a story out of it, because I don't know, we love these kind of stories a lot of the time. But nonetheless, like, in terms of the game itself, like, it is very fascinating, and it is going to be interesting to see, you know, if Henry Shefflin can get one over, I suppose, his old manager, you know, the master against the apprentice in many ways.
Yeah, again, we're talking about the Munster final being a fascinating thing. I'm really looking forward to this Leinster final. Really think there's, again, I mentioned about Limerick there, there's so many subplots. The obvious subplot here is Henry and Brian Cody. You know, I'm like you. I thought it was a storm, a big storm in a very little teacup. You know, what do you want from people after a game? You know, Cody was gutted. They'd just been pipped at the post by a point, a controversial enough free as well. So I'm sure he wasn't in the best of humour, and Henry's been through a horrific situation with his family this year and probably wanted to get out of there. Wouldn't have been an easy experience for him managing a team against his own county, a county, that glorifies him, and rightly so. I mean, for me, he's the greatest hurler I've ever seen up close. I know we've had so many great hurlers over the years, and I'm not going to start mentioning names, but for me, like Henry, and for him to be coaching a team that isn't Kilkenny, and for that to be against Kilkenny as well, must have been a fairly emotional thing with everything else that's happened, and we won't dwell on that. But yeah, but on the field, I think it's set up. I mean, the Leinster Championship, a lot of people you hear talking about Leinster and Munster, how the intensity is more in Munster. I don't buy that, certainly not with these two teams. Just in the Leinster Championship as a whole, look, you've 3 teams that finished on 6 points as well, so it was very, very tight between Wexford, Dublin and Kilkenny, and there's only scoring difference really that got Kilkenny into the final ahead of Wexford. You've got to give massive credit to Darragh Egan and Wexford for recovering enough to come out with that win over Kilkenny. But where does that leave Kilkenny going into this final? There's no game that Brian Cody sends a team out to go half-assed and to not perform. And it looked for a long time that game that Kilkenny were cruising. And when Wexford upped it, they weren't able to live with Wexford. And I think that's fairly much where the game went, But as a whole, that it just does. I mean, I'm sure in the latter part of this week you're going to see a 20 or 30 Cody and Shefflin stories, and I don't think that's that needs to be the focus of the game. It's what's happening on the field that really matters. And you look at Galway this year; they go so under the radar at times. Henry's done a very good job. I saw them against Limerick in the league, and obviously Garrod was sent off, and we've spoken about that as well. I was massively impressed by Galway in that game. They were just very slick, very quick on the ball, very instinctive hurling, but at the same time sticking to their plans and processes and doing it very well at the time. I mean, we talk about Conor Whelan, Conor Cooney, Gerard McInerney. They've been outstanding in central positions for Galway. Even Whelan coming back from that hamstring injury, coming back so fast, has been a huge fill-up for them. You've also had Fintan Burke have an outstanding season, but you can't have a sideline cut in your own half now, given against you, because Fintan Burke is capable. Seems to be him and Austin Gleeson have taken it to a new level again this year with sideline cuts. And then you've Pádraig and Cathal Mannion backing things up as well. And they've had some outstanding youngsters perform. Brian Concannon, Tom Monaghan in midfield has worked 3 or 4 points every game. And back in defence, Darren Morrissey has really given an exhibition of corner back play throughout. So, I mean, there isn't a lot talked about Galway, and I just don't get it. I mean, they've gone in under the radar a little bit coming into this game. They drew with Wexford first out. Again, they should have won, but they beat Westmeath comfortably, beat Kilkenny by a point, hammered Laois, and beat Dublin by 6-7 points as well. And for me, Galway are strong favourites going into this game, which probably suits Kilkenny down to the ground. I think the bookies have it fairly even, Stephen, but I've been mightily impressed with Galway throughout this season. Whether Henry has just solidified things. Of course, you have to mention as well that they're without Joe Canning, who's been their talisman for way too long from Galway's point of view. And it did take Joe retiring for guys to step up, and Conor Cooney is one that, it's just no fuss. He goes back 100 yards and taps it free over the bar. That's what I describe it as, because that's what it seems to be for him. It's a very fluid strike, the way he hits the ball. And as I mentioned, they've also Dahi work as well in the full back line. You don't get a better full back than Dahi work. So they're so strong up to that spine, and they've improved with the likes of Tom Monaghan in there as well. They've Evan Nyland to come off the bench as well, maybe. I'm not sure what his situation is in and about that team, who's another outstanding talent. So, you look at Galway, and then, of course, you look at Kilkenny. You're going to be looking at TJ Reid, Owen Murphy. That save against, last time out against Wexford was just, ridiculous. Again, Paddy Deegan has had a decent year at centre-back, and there's also been a resurgence of Walter Walsh as well. He's looked very dangerous the last couple of games. And obviously, you have to talk about Adrian Mullen, and Owen Cody. Mullen probably hasn't hit the heights since that cruciate yet. From where he was in 19, he's just slowly getting back there, which is understandable. He's still very, very young. I think he's only 22, maybe 23. Owen Cody, as I mentioned, another Ballyhale Shamrocks man, which again brings back that subplot between maybe even just Ballyhale and Henry against each other more so than Cody. And one guy who's really stood out for Kilkenny this year and has been a great discovery has been Cian Kenny. really, really workhorse of a player, but able to create as well. And there's just there's so much talent, available for this game. And you look at Kilkenny's season, 3 wins and 2 losses. Those losses to Galway and Wexford, I'm sure will have smarted or left Brian Cody smarting. They had handy wins then against Dublin, Laois and Westmeath. And you just wonder with Kilkenny, and it's a different Kilkenny, obviously, with Brian still in there. Where's the consistency? And that's the question with Galway as well. Can Galway just rise? We talked about that with Limerick, incrementally improving every game. And that's where Galway, I think, need to be. Where Kilkenny, it's a bit of a mixed bag so far this season. But, again, it's anyone's call.
Yeah, it's a strange one, all right, with Kilkenny, like you mentioned there. I mean, like a lot of people I've spoke to still fancy Kilkenny, even though the fact they lost to Galway, lost obviously at home to Wexford as well. So I mean, it's a strange one with them. Like they clearly do have some of the best hurlers in the country, probably arguably the best manager in GAA history. And you wouldn't be surprised if they were to come through this game, but at the same time, like it's been a weird season for them, hasn't it? Because it's just been very mixed, and although they've had some good moments and bad moments, it's a hard one to really judge them going into this Leinster final.
Yeah, I'm mentioning it, it's consistency, and you just don't know what you're going to get from Kilkenny right now. Yeah, they comfortably dispatched the teams you would expect them to comfortably dispatch, and you thought the Dublin performance was, okay, here you go, this is this Kilkenny team, then they go to lose to Wexford. So it's just very hard to know. I think certainly in the forwards, you've had Alan Murphy playing midfield as well. They've like reshaped their midfield a bit, 1 in, 1 out every game, it seems to be. With like Killian Buckley thereabouts as well. And it just doesn't seem to be consistent performances every game. TJ even hasn't it, and TJ is 34 years of age now. You can't be expecting TJ to be the player he was 3-4 years ago. It's just not going to happen. But he's still vital to that Kilkenny team. You have, like I mentioned, on Cody, to have forwards coming out, their backside really. They just seem to have them every which way, and the Walshes as well with Walter and and Tommy Walsh's brother, his first name escapes me, Pádraig Walsh. Pádraig, like Pádraig's been converted into a centre forward. Still think he's a better halfback myself, but that was the age-old thing with Tommy as well. It was he a better forward or is he a better back? He was pretty good at both, and I think Pádraig is as well. But I just think he's more suited to that role at wing back. But and this is what I'm getting to, is that Kilkenny backline, is it just that little bit porous from where it was? I mean, you're not going to create the likes of the JJ Delaney's, the Jackie Tyrrells, ever again. They're one-offs, and it's just not going to happen. But Hugh Lawler has done a steady job at full back for a long time. Tommy Walsh is in there as well. Are they at the same level as guys in the past? No, of course they're not. Are they at a level Kilkenny need them to be right now? With that dangerous Galway full forward line, we'll know more Sunday, obviously. But I think if you're Henry Shefflin looking, and that Galway management team looking at Kilkenny, that's where you're going to target them. Paddy Deegan has done a fine job at centre back, and sadly for Kilkenny people, they're just going to keep comparing them to their players of the past. Is Paddy Deegan Brian Hogan? Of course he's not, but you can't expect him to be. He's a completely different player, but he's had a good year at centre back. But I think where teams are going to target Kilkenny for the rest of this championship is in their full back line.
Yeah, and as for Galway, as you mentioned there, like it's a strange one for Galway as well, because for whatever reason, like they don't seem to be getting the hype maybe that they deserve. And they've obviously come through the Leinster Championship unbeaten. They beat Kilkenny. They probably should have come out with that win against Wexford, obviously let it slip right at the end, but obviously came through Dublin fairly comfortably as well, beat Laois and Westmeath comfortably. So they've had a very, very strong year. And as you said, like no Joe Canning in the team. Obviously, he stepped away and retired, and obviously new management coming in. So it's been a very, very good year from a Galway point of view. And it's interesting, like, because when you look at their team, like maybe they don't have any like standout star players, maybe, and maybe that's why they're not quite getting the sort of credit. Like I think when you look at Kilkenny, people instantly think of TJ Reid and Owen Cody, and you could say the same for Limerick, Cork, Clare in terms of their standout players. Maybe because Galway didn't make it far in the championship last year, they haven't had really time to sort of breed those players through. But like I suppose for Galway, like they are dangerously going under the radar, because it wasn't too long ago they were All-Ireland champions themselves.
Yeah, I think it suits Henry Shefflin and Galway to a T for them to be going in under the radar like they are. You mentioned 17 under Micheál Donoghue. They won the All-Ireland and they were full value for it. And it was great. You mentioned about Clare winning things. It would be great to see. That Galway team winning All-Ireland was fantastic for hurling. It was just brilliant to see Joe Canning especially, and that's not being disparaging towards the other players, but to see him finally, get reward for all he put in to our sports, it was great. There's still a fine nucleus of that team. They have a change in goals in Éanna Murphy, and I think that could be one of Galway's weaknesses, and that's not being harsh on Éanna. He's just had a tough time at times. It's only his third championship year, and he's obviously they're going with him, and Henry's decided to go with him. Shane O'Neill, fellow Limerick man for 2 years, went with him and gave him his head, but I think just a couple of mistakes. It happened in that Kilkenny game, a soft enough goal that you'd be very disappointed as a goalie to see that go past. It happens, of course it does. Goalies make mistakes, and it's how you react. In fairness, then I'm criticising him, but I'm going to praise him at the same time. He came out, dusted himself down, gave a great ball out that won the game for Galway. It was a quick puck out, dusted himself down immediately, fired it out the wing, and a free came from it. So that's a sign of his temperament, which is a positive thing for Galway. But I'll go back to it. You mentioned it, that star players. No, there's maybe Conor Whelan you could maybe argue is probably the marquee guy that is mentioned more than other players. And again, that suits them. They have Gerard McInerney, who's had a resurgence, I think, this year. After 17, I know he had a tough year against Limerick. I mentioned him earlier, talking about Kyle Hayes. They had a tough year. Galway had accumulated a lot of injuries. I heard Joe Canning actually talking about it last week, that how cracked he was going in to some of the games in 18. And it was just, time caught up with him. Limerick should have won that game comfortably. You don't win any All-Ireland easy, but Limerick scored 2 points in the last, or a point or something, the last 20-odd minutes. It was helter-skelter at the time for them. But, but they've had Dahi Burke, and eventually they've added to that with Fintan Burke. Brian Concannon has eventually come through after a fantastic underage career. Like I mentioned earlier, Tom Monaghan has been an absolute revelation at midfield for them. Outside of his work rate alone, his scoring ability just pops up 3 or 4 points every game, no fuss. And I think that's very much the standard that Galway have had. They're no fuss. They get on with their job. Something gets them down, like that thing with Éanna Murphy, dusted himself down, got on with it, got the puck out, they got the score, okay, controversial free, but either way, it was given, and that's that. So that's for me the biggest thing with Galway. But they have game winners. Conor Cooney can win a game in his own on his day. It's the same with Conor Whelan. If Conor Whelan gets ball, and good ball, against any full back line, they're in trouble, immediately in trouble. And they have other players to come off the bench, the likes of Jack Grealish. I mentioned Darren Morrissey. Jack Grealish has had a fine year in cornerback as well for them. And they have players to come off the bench as well. Look, Galway aren't being talked about. I remember in 2020, Limerick, when they beat Waterford in the final, and that semi-final against Galway was in the melting pot the whole way through up to the last 5 minutes. And that's what Galway are capable of. They don't have Joe Canning. It may work conversely for them in the fact that, okay, there's no Joe to rely on. I have to stand up. You have to stand up. We all have to stand up. And that, could be a huge thing for Galway, going forward. Let alone this season, which to me, they've just been really impressive. And that's all I can say about them.
Absolutely, yeah. Jack says here, Galway favourites, but don't rule out Kilkenny. Won't like to lose again. I go for Kilkenny by 3. Ultimately, who do you reckon is going to be the Leinster champions in the end? I mean, it's an incredibly hard one to call. I mean, you wouldn't want to be the one to call this one, to be perfectly honest. It could easily be extra time, possibly even more. But how do you see it ultimately playing out?
Yeah, it's going to be tight anyway. I think I don't see either team blitzing each other in this one, a bit like the Limerick-Clare game. I think it's going to be very tight for long periods. To me, like it is in any game, goals will be crucial. Kilkenny historically and Cody sets his teams up for score goals. If a goal's on, go for it. And to be fair, Galway can have the ability to do that as well, but goals do win games. It just depends on Kilkenny's consistency. If they can hit a mark that they probably hit against Dublin, certainly in that second half against Dublin, it was like the Kilkenny of old watching them at times. If they can hit that level, they have every chance of winning this. But I'm going to tip Galway. I just think Galway have gone, like I said earlier, Limerick, they're improving each time they go out. That draw with Wexford is a game they should have had in the bag after 50 minutes. It should have been long over. Wexford shouldn't have been in the game at that stage. They learned from that, and they learned quickly. And that was impressive for me. Where Kilkenny are such a mixed bag so far this year, it's hard to call. So I'm just going to go for Galway to shade it. And as you said, it could be extra time. Hopefully not more. You don't want to see a provincial fight. I don't know. Maybe at adults it's different. Certainly, I didn't enjoy the Munster minor hurling final and seeing that in penalties. I think that was a bit harsh for 16, 17-year-olds. But for adults, you live with the rough and the smooth. And I just hope it doesn't go to penalties. It would be a fantastic occasion if it did. But I just think Galway could shade it. I could need extra time to decide it.
Yeah, it is probably going to happen at some point, though. There probably is going to be a bit. It mightn't be this year or next year, but at some stage, like there might be a big game that'll eventually go to penalties. Irish guy says Joe Canning has proven one thing, and that is a team cannot rely on one man. Ultimately, it's a team effort, and Lohan has to understand this with Tony Kelly. I suppose moving on to the Joe McDonagh Cup final then between Kerry and Antrim. I mean, Antrim will obviously be going in as big favourites. Obviously haven't come down from the Leinster Championship last year, but at the same time you have to commend Kerry. I mean, I don't know how they managed to find themselves into the final. Like there was all sorts of scenarios that needed to happen for them to end up in the Joe McDonagh Cup final. And again, like even last year against all odds they made it into the final. The year before they weren't really touted either. Like 3 consecutive years they're now in the Joe McDonagh Cup final, and again against Antrim in a repeat of, well, obviously Kerry's win against Antrim a couple of weeks ago, but also the 2020 Joe McDonagh Cup final as well.
Yeah, massive game for both for obvious reasons. Antrim, as you mentioned, Aaron, coming down last year from the Leinster Championship. Yeah, Kerry sprung everyone with that victory against Antrim last time out in the group stage of it, and looked all set for an Offaly v Antrim final. Offaly will be really smarting after that. They've had such positivity with Mick Finlay over them and with their minors winning the Leinster Championship for the first time. And God knows long, I must mention Limerick man that was over that team and Leo O'Connor as well. Yeah, it's a funny one, Kerry. It seems to be, hopefully they've hotels sorted and everything for Sunday now as well after that issue last week. Yeah, it just like there seemed to be a bit of problems for Stephen Malumphey a couple of weeks ago when Shane Nolan was kind of excommunicated out of the panel. I'm not sure the full story of what happened there, but when you see these things happening, it can go one or two ways. It obviously has galvanised Kerry because no one gave him a chance up against that Antrim team that had just waltzed their way through Joe McDonagh up to that point. So it's a massive game, obviously, like with the chance of getting back into the Leinster Championship, you know, for both. You'd imagine Antrim will be smarting from that defeat to Kerry last time out, and they'll be gung-ho and making sure it doesn't happen again. But can't write off this Kerry team. Stephen Malumphey has brought stuff to them. I saw them against Limerick earlier on in the year. While Limerick won that game comfortably, they'd made a few switches in that team to strengthen it, from Robin Peter to Pay Paul in a sense forwards, moving into the defensive setup, and it worked. Look, they have one of the most seriously talented hurlers in Shane Conway in the country on his day. Shane is an outstanding player. We've seen that when he's playing with better players at Fitzgibbon Cup level with UCC. But you'd have to fancy Antrim. You know, they're going to be strong favourites. Maybe the open field of Croke Park hasn't suited Kerry in recent years in the Joe McDonagh. We saw that with Westmeath last year. Westmeath just always had that little bit too much for them. Kerry were kind of over-reliant on Conway. They also have the Nolans, who are very impressive hurlers as well. You know, but I just fancy Antrim to hit that level. They're just all over the park. They seem to, and you know, they were so good last year in Leinster as well, and very unlucky to find themselves back down the Joe McDonagh Cup, and they'll be hell bent, you know, with returning to that level for 2023.
Yeah, like you've obviously had Conal Cunning, Sean Elliott, James McNaughton, who've all looked very, very impressive from an Antrim point of view. And I suppose they were already in the Joe McDonagh Cup final by the time that Kerry game came around. So, I mean, can you read too much? Like, I suppose if you're a Kerry fan, you're obviously jubilant and you're saying it was down to ourselves and it was down to Kerry. But I suppose from an Antrim point of view, you know, you're probably looking at it and thinking it was a bit of a dead rubber, really, from an Antrim perspective. So, like, can you look too much into that result, or at the same time, could that maybe be a worry from an Antrim perspective?
No, I don't think Antrim will be looking into anything. The only thing that result can do for Antrim is spur them on. If you're really looking at it, who would you rather play in the final, Offaly or Kerry? They'd probably, if they're pushed, say Kerry. So I'm not suggesting anything for a second untoward with that game. They may have taken their eye off the ball. Look, we're qualified. This game, yeah, we want to win it, but are we too pushed, really? You know, you just don't know. But yeah, I think no team goes out to lose any game, and I've never subscribed to that. But to take their eye off the ball, perhaps, and it may have just refocused. And I think their management team may have used it as a bit of a stick the last couple of weeks. Said, look, lads, if you leave these fellas at you, this is what they can do. So, again, look, it's a fantastic occasion for both teams to be running out in Croke Park. I know they're probably used to it now, which is even better for the so-called smaller counties to be getting their day out in Croke Park. But I just think Antrim, you mentioned 3 top-class players that Antrim have. They've plenty more on top of it as well. And they just maybe have that bit. I'd say if I pushed Antrim by 4 or 5 points.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there as well. I think as much as you'd love Kerry to get the victory, maybe for the storyline that would come with it, and obviously then they have the chance of playing Cork as well, and like what a obviously historic rivalry in football, and the fact you'd have them two playing each other in a championship game in hurling, I think would be
just a side note. Just a side on that, Aaron. Is this the case where Kerry, if they have to beat Laois, but Antrim goes straight up?
Yeah, it's a bit. It's a little confusing, to be honest.
Yeah, I just on it, and I know we're not going to. I just think that's ridiculous. I think.
It definitely is. It makes no sense. Yeah.
At this stage as well, look, I understand the mechanics of the Joe McDonagh leading into Leinster, but I think it's high time that Kerry are back in the Munster Championship too. In general, I mean, it's going to be tough for a few years. They're a long way behind the 8 ball. But I mean, like Kerry have such a successful football team. They have a beautiful small pocket of clubs in North Kerry that are hurling mad. The likes of Eamon Fitzmaurice and Paul Galvin over there, outstanding football people. They're also outstanding hurlers, and they're very proud of their hurling heritage as well. And I think Kerry GAA need to look at themselves a little bit. I'm not calling out Kerry GAA for 1 second, but I think it's high tide that Kerry are back in the Munster Championship rather than playing to get into Leinster. And either way, if they win on Sunday, they should be automatically into Leinster Championship.
Absolutely, yeah, and they should probably go into the Munster Championship. Like, I don't even know why they couldn't, even just put the 6. You've obviously got 6 teams in Leinster at the minute. You can have 6 in Munster next year, 5 in Leinster. Laois go down. You could at least do it that way. I know you'd say, well, Kerry are most likely going to be on the receiving end of hammerings every week, and the relegation would almost be written before it even starts. But at the same time, you have to give these teams the chance to at least compete, because if you're going to take away that chance to compete, then sure, it's a very pessimistic way of looking at it. To be no point competing at all.
Yeah, you look how far Westmeath have come in 2 seasons. And they're the prime example. The Trojan work that's been done in Westmeath hurling to get them to the level they are. The same in Antrim. Antrim have had a resurgence. Again, that little slip last year going back down to Joe McDonagh may have just, been that. We'll find out in future years. And there's no question, maybe Kerry aren't ready, and maybe I'm wrong in saying that. But, they should be in the Munster Championship, irrespective of the Joe McDonagh. If they qualify for the Joe McDonagh, I'm talking about, should go straight into Munster, not Leinster. But, there's something has to be done with it. What? Okay, yeah, you'll say that you'll get nothing from hammerings, which more likely would happen for that Kerry team. But I mean, the only way they're going to improve is by being exposed to that top level learning.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and hopefully at some stage, anyway, the GAA can have a look at that and fix it, because I definitely think, as you said, like, I mean, the incentive is clearly there for the Leinster sides, but for Kerry, they seem to be caught in this sort of weird position really that they find themselves in. But yeah, look, listen, John, very much appreciate you jumping on, very much appreciated. And well, yeah, I suppose best of luck for obviously the Munster final on Sunday. Are you going to? Did you get tickets in the end? Or?
Yeah, I'm working at it, so in a very neutral capacity for Sporting Limerick. So I'll be as neutral as I can be anyway.
Perfect. Well, look, top man, John, much appreciated you coming on.
My pleasure, Aaron.